Well, thank you for coming. I'm Brad Pappas. I am the Executive Director of FEI Twin Cities, and we are thrilled that you're here because you're in for a treat. Lynn Casey's going to tell you some fantastic stories, and it's just going to be a lot of fun. But before we start, I want to thank all of our strategic partners, because without them, we wouldn't have this. So please remember our strategic partners: Legend, Horton, PNC Bank, Cressa, Brown & Brown, Prouty Project, BDO, All Energy Solar, Baker Tilly, Salo, Marsh McLennan Agency, CIBC, Bank of America, AFPI. Those are all our gold sponsors. And we have a new gold sponsor that just is joining us this week, Biscay. I know.
I want to see how many times you can butcher that name.
But we're thrilled they're here, and we also have our silver sponsors, Stephen Douglas, Oracle NetSuite, and another new sponsor, and I won't pick on you, Ryan, it's Riveron, will be joining us as our silver sponsor. We're thrilled. Let's see, what else? I also want to remind you that we have a couple of great events coming up in February. In fact, we have several. Wednesday, February 8th, we have an event presented by one of our gold sponsors, Horton. The title is Inflation, Access to Capital, and the Current Interest Rate Environment. We have a great speaker, Casey Matthews. Please join us. It's at the France 44 event space. Great space. We'll have a box lunch for you, and it's going to be a terrific event. We also have coming up in February an event at Prize Brewing Company. Are you familiar with Prize? Well, you will be. It's a great venue. It's they've been around for a couple years now. They're over Northeast, and the story of how this brewery got going, and just all the other amazing things that are going to happen with that group. They're just very entrepreneurial. We're going to meet the entrepreneurial daredevil Jeremy Price. He's the owner. So, without further ado, I want to welcome Rachel Rice, who will be moderating here today. Rachel is with Padilla. She's the CFO, and she's also on our board, and she's the chair for the marketing and communications. So, without further ado, there she is.
Thank you, Brad. Good morning.
Good morning.
So I get the honor of introducing Lynn Casey, who truly is a Minnesota icon. She will share with us today insights from her unique and interesting 18-year reign as CEO of Padilla, where she shepherded extraordinary growth, tactical acquisitions, and company-wide innovation. Plus her many various roles as chair or board director at these esteemed organizations. So she is chair of the Itasca Project. She is a board director at Xcel Energy. She's also a board member of many organizations like Arthur Page Society, MIA, which is formerly the Minnesota Institute of Arts. She's a past chair of the University of Minnesota Foundation. She's also board director with Walker Sands, Wallman Inc. She's also a board member of Lakewood Cemetery, and she is a very active member with the Minnesota Women's Economic Roundtable. Not sure how she fits all that in, but she does. So I had the privilege of working with Lynn Casey just for a short while before she retired in 2019. She's always had impeccable timing. So right before the pandemic, she retires. So it's great timing. But while she is retired, she still wants to have more flexibility, but then while working with for-profit organizations, also nonprofits, and industry associations via their board of directors, and then also just giving back to the Minneapolis St. Paul community at large. So we welcome the one and only Lynn Casey.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm good. So this is the first morning meeting in a long time. So why me? I'm a person, but my coffee cup is back there, so if I take a break and go, you'll know why. So Rachel, I was telling a couple of people today, I have no regrets, and I think that's the best way that you retire from an organization. Nothing. I miss my colleagues. I miss the clients. I miss the view from our fabulous offices. Have we ever hosted this group at
We have yes, and we have a few more events coming up. One women's one that will be there in March.
Fantastic. So those are things. But I think the thing that I miss the most is not having a chance to work with you for longer than we did. So we hadn't intended to sell the organization. We were doing quite nicely as an employee-owned organization, a full 100% ESOP. Although I realized that going forward, we had no issues with repurchase liability, but things were going to be tight. People like me who've been in the organization for a long time. And I retired in 2019, and we became an ESOP in 1992, and then full-blown in 1997. Yes, and so really, hadn't intended to sell, except that through acquisitions, which we cash flowed without debt, I realized that things were going to be a little tight. So, just as I was realizing that, I got a call from a broker, and he said, "How would you like to meet these nice people from Canada?" And I said, "Well, are they private? Is it a private company?" And he said, "Yes, indeed," because that was the criteria if we were ever going to go. And even though my practice for sure was with primarily publicly traded companies, and the firm was known for that, I had gone on record saying that I really didn't think that public relations companies, any kind of service organization, should be part of a publicly traded company. It's just too difficult to serve the clients the way you need to, and also be super, super mindful of the bottom line. So anyway, very nice people. They had owned Canada pretty much, and they had nowhere to go. So you go province to province, and the company's name at the time was National. They had conflicts all over the place, so they needed to move. So they were looking at us after a failed attempt, in Boston to be their flagship for the United States. And they waited until they had settled and bought up a few places in Western Europe. They figured being Canadian, London would be a good place to start. And they were a little concerned about America, so they really checked us out. I mean, I think there was nothing they didn't know about us. He knew our children by name, he knew theirs. I mean, it was really quite something. But the last 6 months, because I told them that I wanted to leave earlier than they had planned on me leaving, but of course didn't tell me. They said, "Well, that company that we bought in Boston that's sort of hanging on by a thread, we'd like you to help us turn it around, get rid of the leader over time so we can bring somebody else in." And so I thought, well, that might be kind of fun. So as Rachel was telling me this morning and reminding me, I probably saw Rachel more in Boston than I think I saw her in Minneapolis. So, excuse me. Anyway, so here we are. I'm going to talk about a few things. And Brad and I agreed that we would cover 3 topics. One is what the heck is public relations anyway? So what is it? What isn't it? What is it? And second was I have 5 key ingredients that I've been talking about forever that are the key to building brands and especially protecting reputations. So I will share those with you. And then third, several of you I think are interested in joining the corporate board. I have some experience with that, so I'll talk a little bit about the considerations. And then throughout this, please don't be shy. When your coffee kicks in, raise your hand and ask me a question, challenge me, give an observation. please, because as I've said to a couple of people here, I'm not sure I have 50 minutes of material, and I don't think you want to listen to me horse through 50 minutes of material. So here we go. So back to Padilla. We actually started, I still say we, after 35 years, it's really hard to kick that habit. And I'm not sure that I really want to. So we started out actually in the 60s, which is a long time for a public relations firm to be in existence. Not many of them last that long. And we started by a couple of newspaper men. They were on the business desk, such as it was back in the day. And most of their friends were starting companies or leading companies. So they thought, well, why not start an investor relations firm? So we actually started out as a pure play investor relations firm, and working for a lot of the large publicly traded companies. Some of them were NYSE. When NASDAQ came on, a lot of them switched over to NASDAQ. And in the 70s, for sure, and in the 80s, the IPO market was going crazy. So it was really great business for a firm like ours. It was steady. So you had your quarterlies, right? And you wanted to talk about those. And then at the end of the year, whenever that was for companies, we would be able to publish what was an annual report, which is actually more like a coffee table book. If any of you remember those days, companies would spend, way too much money. And they would turn to us to produce these. And we knew that it was going to be a beautiful document that indeed the CEO is going to have in the lobby coffee table. So we had a lot of fun. But they basically, as Don Padilla and Dave Spear, the founders, told me each separately, all we really wanted to do was make a little bit of money and hang out with our friends. So, and I thought, what could be better than that? So, fast forward, Padilla still maintains, excuse me, still maintains an investor relations practice today, but it's primarily focused on companies that are going public. So most of them don't have investor relations people. Their CFOs are a little bit too busy to double as the IR lead as well, although they're intimately involved. So we'll help take a company public, the communications around that, and then over the years work ourselves out of a job and bring in an investor relations person as the company gets its feet on the ground. So that's kind of our jam related to investor relations. So, excuse me, I really apologize. It's the winter. Love it or leave it. I love it. That might help. Oh, thanks. And then I get to do a couple of events. That's good too. So I'm going to start. By the way, is that agenda okay with everybody? And then, interrupt me, please. And then I'm sure we're going to have time at the end to talk about whatever it is you guys want to talk about. Open book.
Yes, as Lynn said, if you have questions, raise your hand and we'll.
Yeah, totally. So what is public relations? Most of us, even in the industry, have a hard time defining that. I'll just put it out there. And there are hundreds of definitions. And most of them are really long. Some of them are 3 pages long, if you can believe that. But most of us came to this business as word people, so that would make a lot of sense. The one I like, and the one that seems to stick, is the practice of helping organizations communicate with the people who are important to them. So that definition of people has expanded over the years. And it used to be, back in the day, investors and financial analysts, at least in the Padilla practice. But of course, there are many other stakeholders, as you know. There are employees, there are customers, there are regulators, other elected officials, the community influencers in the communities where a company and its employees live and work. So it's a big job to make sure that that story is told squarely and told well. So even though the PR field has a hard time defining it itself, it probably will always be there because there's a lot to do. So I told you one definition. The definition that I really like is simpler than that. Public relations, PR, equals performance recognized. And why I like that definition is that performance always comes first. You really have to have something to talk about. Run a good company and then tell your story. Tell it to the right people. Tell it with professionals who know what they're doing, and life will be good. So what happens when performance is not so good? You really don't have to spend a lot of time getting recognized for that, because bad performance kind of takes care of itself. So that's when it's helpful to have a good crisis plan and a good crisis team, either inside or outside. And I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. But now I'm going to tell you what public relations is not. It is not spin. It is not obfuscation. It is not, as Richard Nixon was famously saying when he was trying to cover up some of his bad performance, was not, I'm just going to do what I need to do, and then I'll send it over to the PR team, and they will work their PR magic. So they will PR it. So it's really none of that. However, when you walk out of this room today, I'm going to bet you within a matter of a couple of weeks, you're going to hear a newscaster or somebody talk about a PR stunt, talk about a PR cover-up, or that's just PR. And I really understand that. We've been fighting a battle against the spin doctors, in my profession, for years and years and years. And I think we're just about ready to give up. One of the reasons, unlike other professions, is the public relations profession is not licensed. We have tried over the years, and many of us old-timers have the scars to prove it. So there is no licensure. So anybody can get into the public relations business, and if they don't know what they're doing, they can really mess it up for the rest of us. So there's a lot of people who are still pretty underhanded in this business, and a lot of business leaders who still view public relations as an opportunity to not tell their story and tell their story straight. Now, I'm not talking about what we call strategic messaging and framing, because the business of public relations and forming relationships is always started with telling the best story you can about the company. But that doesn't mean covering up the things that aren't good. It's just what you lead with in the complete telling of the story. There's an art and a science to that. But I just want to leave you with my thought, because even though we have lost the battle, it might be something for you to be mindful of and be a student of when you hear PR, stunt, et cetera, because that's not what it is. Yeah?
How do you think Southwest did with its PR?
Oh, this is really a great. I'm so glad you asked that question. First of all, I'm biased. One of my friends runs the communications department there, and she's been a Southwest lifer. I don't think she started in communications. I'm not sure, but anyway, she bleeds the company, and the company's changed over time. But she and several others who've been there for a while are really fighting to keep the spirit of the old days, which was customers and employees first. So what happened at Southwest was totally about performance recognized. It was pretty well known that Southwest was among the laggards when it came to everything that you now need to run an airline. It's very sophisticated. It costs a lot of money. Their decision to not do the hub and spoke like a lot of other larger carriers did worked brilliantly for them in so many ways, but they got caught up by the freak of nature that was, our weather situation. And they were not prepared particularly well for that. But if you notice, their CEO was all over the news media. And if you went on their website, very transparent about what they needed to do. He apologized, which is the first rule of any critical issue. I'm really sorry. None of you should be inconvenienced like this. I'm really sorry that you were. And we are working to make it better. We didn't have any answers out of the gate, and now they're starting to get answers out to the public. But they have been, in my opinion, as transparent as possible. So, so I think they've recovered pretty well. The other thing that they did, and I'll talk about this a little later, is over the years, they have been so true to their roots. And because of that, they really built up that, what we call the bank of trust. So made a lot of deposits, really good in the communities where their people live and work, really good primarily to their customers. They delivered on their promises. So after the, once the fiasco has died down, and now the real work begins, the real performance work begins, their scores have actually bounced back pretty well, and their businesses bounced back pretty well. And I think that's testimony to the goodwill that they have built up over time with their stakeholders. So horrible thing to happen. It exposed some things that probably should have been taken care of years before. But sometimes that happens. Sometimes it takes a crisis, critical issue, for a company to really go into self-examination mode and say, what do we need to do differently? So that's my take on it. Yeah, anybody else have a different take? Yes.
Lynn, I remember having someone from, I remember having someone from Padilla's crisis management practice speak to FEI years ago. And the three words that he mentioned, I'm not going to have it in the right order: name it, claim it, and frame it. And I think it was in the context of 3 Mile Island. I don't know if, and what the punchline from that was that no one knows who the operator of 3 Mile Island is. Everyone remembers the story, the tragedy, as being associated with 3 Mile Island, as opposed to the company that ran the enterprise. Any thoughts on either that story or other sort of crisis management experiences while you were at Padilla?
Thank you for that question, and I love that. Name it. So this is what it is. Don't shy away from that. It's not a little thing. I love Joe Biden. That's my colors, but I think hasn't done himself any favors by dismissing what's going on in the papers. But back to the question. Name it, absolutely. And talk about the gravity of the situation. Claim it. This is on us, if indeed it is. And even if it isn't, claim it, and then you can always disclaim it. But don't push it off to something else. And then how you frame it is about what you're going to be doing to right the situation. It's interesting. I really never thought about 3 Mile Island being that company. I don't even know who the company was, which is weird.
Yeah.
And I wonder, we've got a couple of nuclear facilities in Minnesota. So, and I know that because of my work with Xcel. And I'm wondering if that happened, God forbid, would it be known as Monticello? Would it be known as Prairie Island? Or would it be known as Xcel? It's something really to think about. I'm not sure. And I'm also not sure whether that sort of tailed off. So I'll have to look at the news. Now you got me going here. I'm gonna figure out how long the company was actually associated with that disaster versus the name of I think it was the town, right? Or the facilities, one of the two. Okay, that's my homework for the weekend. Contrast that to Exxon. It's the Exxon Valdez, right? Roseville. So I don't know what to do about that. My thought is, my off-the-top thought is that the bigger you are, the more well-known you are, the bigger the target. So Xcel is fairly well-known around here, maybe not so much around the country. So it could be the Prairie Island disaster. But with Exxon, it's definitely Exxon because they're just a household name. We see it as we're driving by, etc. So that might be something. And in fact, there are a lot of companies for many, many years until they realized the strategy couldn't be that way anymore, largely because of the internet, who really kept a low profile. Even if they had a great story to tell, their leadership was so concerned that once you open yourself up and you tell your stories, you're also going to be the recipient of tough questions and that kind of news coverage, let's say, when bad news happens. So, any follow-ons to that? Okay.
It was Edison and Constellation, by the way, I'm just double checking.
Oh, great! It was Edison, really, and Constellation.
Yeah, it's the operator, I don't know how that really is.
Yeah. Wow. So Edison's a pretty well-known name, but Edison and Constellation is kind of that's a mouthful. 3 Mile Island trips off the tongue. So it's really interesting. Okay, that is my weekend work though. I'm really going to try to figure out when that switched, because it did switch, I'm sure, at some point. So I think, let me go back to, now that I've told you a little bit about public relations and performance recognized, I'm going to talk about that bad performance and how it gets recognized. How many of you in your organizations, or maybe the companies you serve, if you're on the consulting side, how many of you have crisis plans, actually crisis communication plans in your organizations, big and small? I see a couple of hands. Some of you probably aren't sure whether you do or not, and some of you, it may not be appropriate for you, but others it may be, and it might be a good time to sort of ask around and see, number one, if you do have a crisis communications plan, where is it? If it doesn't live on the phone and in the cloud, and it's in a 3-ring binder somewhere gathering dust, and it's like more than 20 pages long, it's probably stuck in the 80s or 90s. Probably want to take a look at that. And if you're not drilling on that frequently with the issues that you think are probably most likely to occur in your organization that could attract some unwanted attention, and those issues that are super, super catastrophic that may not ever happen, but it's the kind of thing where you probably still need to be prepared for them. So if you're thinking about a 2x2, you've got on one axis you've got likely to happen, on the other axis you've got severity. Obviously, that upper corner is going to be where you're going to be focusing some of your drills and maybe some of your plans as well. So a hammer on this, in fact, one year, this is before your time, Rachel, we made a deal with the company that at Padilla, that every client would at least be exposed to the opportunity to have a crisis communications plan. Super simple, super rudimentary. We would do it for free if they didn't, because that's how strongly we felt about the fact that no matter how good your performance is, a bad performance, whether it's out of your control or in your control, can really bring a company down to zero. So super, super important. I'll tell you one story. Does anybody remember when Target got caught in the cybersecurity situation? It's hard to forget that. Now it's sort of almost an everyday occurrence, which is horrible to think about it. But it was still kind of a new thing back then. And so that woke a lot of people up. Interestingly enough, the surveys and the business results after Target recovered from that actually bounced back to normal. Number one, they have good product, good service, et cetera, et cetera. And number two, they had a lot of brand loyalty. So back to that bank of trust. That doesn't happen in most organizations, but it did for Target. And I wanted to say that because crisis recovery, when you have built up that bank of trust, is a lot quicker. But at any rate, that was a big scare for people. And most people didn't have the IT wherewithal to really hire, cybersecurity experts. There wasn't the software there is now. Back in the day, organizations were scared. So I was asked by one of the publicly traded companies in town to address their board about best practices in communicating around anything that would happen cyber-wise that might make the news. Whether that was a forgotten laptop, on a caribou counter that somebody else picked up, or some sort of malware, et cetera, et cetera. So help us out. So I addressed the board, and afterwards, and I really pushed down the communication plan. And they said, well, we have a crisis plan. And they, the CFO showed the board all the boxes and the flow charts. And there was a box for communications. So everybody was satisfied, that was great. I walk out, the CFO meets me at the door and says, that box for communication? I have no idea what's in it. And I said, well, please sit down with your communications people and find out. So as it turns out, number one, this was a B2B company, so a little less exposure than a B2C company. But the comms department was totally on it. But they were on it like a decade ago. So they haven't transferred any of the documents to digitally. It was all in those 3-ring binders I talked about. And they really did let it sit on the shelf and assume that in the heat of the moment where nobody's thinking clearly, that people will remember where the thing is and then what to do. So they started doing some drills on the crises or the critical issues that they probably would experience more than others. So so that's just a cautionary tale. I'm going to stop there. Any comments? Any questions?
Do you think lawyers make good PR people, or think it's a disaster when they make it?
Oh, whoa. Any attorneys in here? Let me take a drink of water. So I'm just going to tell you my personal story. I don't even know that you know this, Rachel, but I moved to the Twin Cities after undergrad in Grand Forks, North Dakota, which was actually in musical theater. Brad, I didn't tell you that. I too did summer stock around the country, schlepping between small town to small town. But I only did that because everybody in my cohort in the early 70s basically got the degree they wanted to get. Those were the days. Had a lot of fun because they were all going to take the LSAT and go to law school. So I moved here in 77, spent 9 months in a accounting firm, which I won't name, while I could get my residence to go to law school. So fortunately, a couple of people, I was in the tax department, so a couple of people knew I was going to law school, and they were unhappy tax lawyers. And they did an intervention, and they said, do you really want to do this? And I said, well, I don't know, everybody else is doing it, and I got into the U, so I guess I should go. And then I thought about it, and I can't remember who those two people are, but I'm just so thankful because they really changed my life. I think I would have made a lousy attorney. But as an attorney, I probably at some point then would have been in corporate, and I would have had public relations people reporting to me. And that is a thing. It started about 10 years ago. Actually, it started when the internet sort of emerged, and everything changed for companies. And it was really important to have somebody who was really understanding of managing risk. And attorneys are brilliant at risk management. And they also are trained much more than public relations people, communications people, marketing people in the business of business. So some people in my profession, when that kind of thing, that trend happened, were lamenting it. But I'm really not. Your question was more about do lawyers make good PR people? Not necessarily, depends on the company. But do they make good managers and public relations people? Yeah, I have no problem with that. A lot of public relations people refuse to work with anybody other than having a direct line to the CEO. And I think that's really important in a lot of companies, but a lot of companies it's just not possible. It's simply not possible. So I would much rather report to an attorney than some others in the C-suite that I can think about. But in terms of attorneys as public relations people, if they are really, if they're not particularly creative, and by that I mean they immediately go to the corners that you can't see around, and they're very protectionist, very risk averse, that's a missed opportunity to talk. And back when I was talking about some of the companies that really lay low, it's pretty much on the advice of their attorneys that they do so. And you can understand why. So for instance, people like me, we are into the long game, right? So an organization has an issue. We know that brand protection is really important. But we also know that the company is going to come out of this and at some point have to talk sooner than later. So a lot of times we're across the room from being attorneys who are talking about, if it's a product liability case, liability. So I once wrote a column that said, it was not a happy time for me because it was the first time that I really spoke out. I felt like I should in my industry. And the title of it was Listen to the Lawyers. Because there's a lot of things that companies really need to do. It makes it a lot really harder for the communicators, but you really you can go down saying too much too early, and I really understand that. And so and that happens to a lot of companies. They do say too much, but on the flip side, you can say too little and go down as well. So for people like me in corporate, it's a really good idea to have a really good relationship with your general counsel and the outside counsel as well. Because if you have a relationship, just like companies, if you have a relationship and it's personal, there's a trust there, there's a bond there, you can talk it out and sort of come to a happy medium after the stuff hits the fan. So I hope that answered the question, and I know I rambled a little bit on that one, but I wanted to go there because some of you are going to perhaps come in contact with general counsel, outside attorneys, even more than you're going to come in contact with public relations people. So it's definitely a balancing act. So I touched on the internet a little bit. I really feel lucky, unlike some of you youngins here, to have lived through that transition. Because it was painful, but it was a lot of fun. And I think those of us who did live through that transition understands, how disruptive it was. It just changed so many things about how organizations do business. And it certainly changed, how public relations people did business. So back in the day, when this whole profession started, CEOs would hire newspaper reporters because they didn't want to deal with the news media, right? So that was the intermediary. They would hire a former reporter. The reporter would be then hated by his colleagues or her colleagues because they crossed over the bad side. But the company was happy to have them because the thought was, if you're a reporter, number one, you know how to tell the story. But more than that, you also know how to keep your former peers at bay. And every once in a while, you might be able to call them a favor. So that's kind of how the whole thing started. And then from sort of the news media, the departments usually grew. There was usually an investor relations person, corporate communications dealing with a whole bunch of other issues, and other people, employee communicators, etc. So departments became pretty large. But one of the things that communications, public relations departments didn't touch was advertising. So public relations dealt with what we call the earned media realm, which means largely in the news media, you can tell a story, you never know how it's going to come up. So having your messages airtight is really important because the reporter has an obligation to speak truth, but sometimes that doesn't always translate. So in exchange for the third party, how can I say, losing the word, but the believability of seeing a newspaper article and reading it. The advertisers and the advertising people deal with the paid media realm, and you buy an ad. It's expensive, not that public relations isn't. It's not free publicity. That's never free, believe me. Rachel knows too. But it usually is a lot less expensive than buying an ad. But the cool thing is you can control every word you say. The uncool thing is that research has proven that the believability index is something that you pay for is pretty darn low. So the internet really changed a lot of things and afforded an opportunity to really break down those barriers. So companies like mine started to hire advertising people, copywriters, creative departments, and people on the ad side started to hire people who were really adept at working with the news media. And so those lines and those barriers are crossed, really for all good, because these disciplines need to kind of work together. But the coolest thing about the internet for companies to be able to tell their story, and for people like me, is it opened up something called owned media. And by that we mean websites and your social channels if you're in an organization. So all of these new ways to communicate that companies didn't have before. They had the news media and they had advertising. So now, if they're really smart, they can do a lot of things with their own channels to become their own news hub and their own news organization. So that has been just a boon for most companies, and also obviously their advisors. So in the early days, I think many of you remember, we called websites brochureware, because basically you just transferred your capabilities brochure or whatever it was to the internet. But now it's pretty sophisticated. I mean, video is everywhere. So there are really opportunities, even without talking to the media, for a company to build a lot of goodwill and a lot of trust, with its own channel. Problem is, you still need to drive people there. So that is an issue. But most people, good communicators, can solve for that as well. So the internet really did have its challenges, though, and that gets me back to crisis communication. So let's say something happened. There was some kind of critical issue in a company. It might take, in the old days, if it became public at all, it might take a long time. Enough time for the public relations people to find that through reminder and to make sure that they were kind of airtight in terms of addressing whatever came next. So we used to call that the golden day. And then with the internet, we used to, then it turned into the golden hour of preparation. And now, if it happens at all, it is the golden minute. So back to the importance of really being familiar, primarily with the numbers to call and the routine about what happens when you get that unwanted news media call, or you see something show up on the internet. It's really critical to have. It's really critical to be airtight about that if you have any opportunity to influence at all. So everybody's a journalist. Facts be damned. There's probably more opinion than facts. It's a really, really hard time for organizations to be able to break through and really tell their story and have it be believable. So, but again, back to performance recognized. If you're a good company, you can usually win up. So, but the internet has made it a little bit harder. Yeah, it really has. So, but it keeps people like me. Organizations like Padilla, which has a really strong corporate communications and crisis communications team, it really does keep us in business, for better or worse. So that's why I hammer on performance recognized, because if you have to call for a PR firm or turn to your communicators to clean up a mess, it's probably too late, given the internet and social media as it is. So it's also not cheap. It really is not cheap. And I'll be the first to admit it. It's a lot more expensive if your company is in trouble and you're hiring somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. Same way with attorneys, same way with financial advisories. It's just, it is what it is. So, but even so, it's worth a company just doing the right thing to avoid mayhem like me. So, this is, well, I'll tell you this story. I was with a friend of mine who runs a big company here in town. He's no longer CEO. But was not a client. They had a long-standing relationship with another firm. So I think he felt like he could trust my judgment. And they had just gone through a very public fiasco. And he got the bill. Actually, the CFO got the bill and picked himself off the floor. And then brought it into the CEO and said, do we really want to pay this? And the CEO says, we have no choice. So he told me this, and he said, gave me the number, and I knew the situation pretty well. I knew the firm, really good firm in New York. Yes, the prices are a little higher there, but in many respects you do get what you pay for. That firm had a lot of integrity. I knew they weren't doing anything that was untoward. And the CEO said, I wish it wasn't so expensive. And when I told him that, I thought that was legitimate. And so I got to thinking, can we lessen the burden? Because it's no fun for anybody. It's no fun for Rachel's department to send out a huge bill when you know that perhaps certain things could have happened within a client to prevent bringing us in for a protracted engagement. So I created a talk. And the talk was titled, Put Me Out of a Job, Please. So basically it is doing some really things that you would just know are kind of no-brainers. They're practical things. They're golden rule, platinum rule types of things. Doing them and doing them well as a company will save a lot of money in the long run. So I'm going to show you those 5 essential ingredients. And none of this will surprise you, but maybe some of the stories I tell might. And you might even see yourself in some of these pictures. So the first one, if you are a hiring manager or you know people who are, please hire for, above all else, integrity and values. I know it sounds silly, but when you hire good people, they won't disappoint you. Maybe they won't be the most skilled, but you'll be able to trust them and circle them with people who can get them skilled out to where you need them. So that's why I love the company that my company sold to, our company sold to, because of the time they spent talking about their families, talking about their values, talking about the business that they turned away because it just didn't smell right. That's the kind of company that we wanted to belong to. So it's not easy though, and I'll share my big mistake. I was talking about working with attorneys and in critical issue situations. Sometimes you just come to an impasse, particularly if PR people are dealing with lawyers that they don't know. So that would be happening to us all the time because of the deep practice we had in the critical issues realm. So I thought, well, you know what? If I hired an attorney who was kind of a media attorney, meaning they were really understanding libel, slander, all of these things that risk-averse attorneys want to steer clear of. But if they understood where the gray areas were, and were able to, attorney to attorney, level with their peers, we might be in better shape, the company might be in better shape, we might have to charge them less money. Wouldn't that be great? So I went looking, and it turns out there was an attorney in town who had the exact experience that that we needed to build what we call the litigation and communication practice. And she wanted off the partner track, which she was on at a big law firm here in town. And so, and I just fell in love with her immediately. She was in town, she looked the part, she was brilliant, and she was an attorney. So I was blind to the fact that she was a really core cultural fit with Padilla. We like team players. We don't like sole practitioners. We like people who are not mercurial. And I didn't know any of this because I wanted so badly to build this litigation communication practice and take it nationally. There were signs. I went to her going away party that the firm threw for people who were on the partner track and decided to do something else, or anybody of that stature who would leave. So it was in a pretty big ballroom in their headquarters building. There were 3 people who showed up. And this was a firm of about, back then it was about 800. And I thought, well, everybody's busy. So, you know how your mind goes? I'm sure you all have been, most of you have been there, right? You just wanted to have it so badly. So anyway, she was awesome. She was awesome. She started to build a practice. Phone was ringing off the hook. Not immediately. It took about a year. But she was really starting to get traction. And then she walked into my office, and she had somebody at her side. She says, "This is my financial advisor, and I want $1 million next year for my salary." And I thought, Amy, that's like 5 times as much as I make. All right, so being real here, I want to come to the business. You're in the ESOP, et cetera, et cetera. So we went round and round. I felt bad, but I said, we can't see eye to eye. This is just not a thing. So she left, and the day we announced her departure, I had 3 people in my office, and they said, she made our teams cry. And I said, how in the world did this happen? And I didn't know about it. And they said, we knew you wanted this so badly. We didn't have the heart to tell you, and we thought maybe it would go away. I'm just telling you this because it can happen. So if you're in a place, even in real life, versus work life, if you notice that somebody's doing that, put them out of their misery. As hard as that conversation is going to be, if my team, my colleagues had done that at Padilla with me, we would have saved some heartache for some people. And that's on me, and I carry that. And the only way that I can get rid of some of that burden is to share it with people. So again, hire for integrity and ethics, please. This is right up your alley as well, which is make sure that all your financial controls processes are in place. This is nothing new, especially to you all, and especially the larger the company, the bigger their internal audit staff, external audit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a pretty buttoned-up world now. No one really wants to make a mistake, but it's interesting how you have those controls in place, but then because of the trust that's built up among colleagues in the workplace, you just kind of forget about them sometimes, and maybe you don't look at an expense account as carefully as you should, or little things like that. You notice this, you notice that, and I think about in my time 3 critical issues where the nicest middle to upper manager in the organization was the one that was forging their expense accounts. They're the ones that, one of them went to jail, white collar crime, and it was the manager who didn't pay attention. So again, something to be mindful of that I hope none of you have to deal with, but it's just a cautionary tale, I think. It's those little things when people get comfortable that they overlook. So, and then also other kinds of protection policies. Most companies, most organizations have social media policies. So if you're posting as yourself, not any reference to the company. You're never posting on behalf of the company, even if it's something that you know that you can correct and respond. It's typically funneled through the communications department. Same with getting reporter calls. It does happen, though, that somebody goes rogue, usually without their even knowing it. So one of the best examples I think I have is a poor middle manager, account manager at a company, a public relations company based in New York, and he really didn't want to go to Memphis. Hated the town, but FedEx was a big client, so he tweeted a few people and said, I'm here in this hellhole, get me out. So it was one of those funny kind of things. Well, somebody picked it up and it went. Obviously, FedEx was no longer this firm's client. This person is fired, but it's just kind of reminding people, just, do the right thing and don't do the right thing. But if you're part of an organization, even a small one, please, have that kind of social media policy, et cetera, and make sure that people really understand it when they're signing. Non-disclosure as well. That's usually where most of these things come in. So the next one is, I talked a lot about building up the trust bank, and that has to do with first doing the right thing, but also talking about it. And don't be shy. There's really a lot of opportunities, especially in that own media realm, because like Target, when something happens out of your control, there's so many things out of our control, but when something happens like that, if you're not a known entity, it's kind of it's a little bit tough. You're climbing out of a hole already. And then finally, cultivate employees as ambassadors. And sort of the employee population in an organization, until maybe a few years ago, has really been sort of an underserved, taken for granted, uncommunicated with part of business. And companies are finally realizing that they need to create a space of belonging and a space where employees really want to work, because, especially in this day and age, you don't want to lose a soul unless you're already decided to counsel them out. But it's just really a tough hiring market out there. I'm sure most of you who are in a position to hire know that. So you want to keep these folks. And they want to know that they're joining or that they're with a really good company. Again, telling your story, making sure that they understand it, believe it, question it, then they'll become ambassadors. Straight talk. They really will. But it does take some work. I just saw a study, I think it might have been in Harvard Business Review, or some other place where it's kind of a believable mechanism for information, right? So it was employees who would gladly forego their next raise if their company talked a little bit more and actually lived its values and told them what its purpose was and made them feel like they were part of that purpose, which I thought was very interesting. So anyway, I'll just leave you with that. 5 things. So some of the process policies, no-brainers, but because they're no-brainers, worth paying attention to. The trust bank I talked about, telling the story well, and then finding employees as ambassadors. So how are we doing on time?
I was just going to say, Lynn, time flies when you're having fun, but you easily gobbled up 55 minutes. So we have 5 minutes left.
Good, because that's about all I have to tell you about boards. Is anybody, first of all, anybody on a board of any kind, nonprofit, corporate, private, public? Okay, that's a good amount. So those of you who are doing, if you're not full up, you might be thinking about the next one. If you're doing nonprofit, you're probably thinking, what's my next step and how do I incorporate? So I'm going to run through these really quickly. So first of all, if you're interested in board work, this is not a requirement at all, but get your feet wet if you haven't in a nonprofit board. There are many good reasons for doing that. You're going to learn a lot, you're going to share a lot, you're going to feel good in the process, and your company will probably thank you for it if you belong to one that really cares about that kind of thing. So, if you've done that, fine, or if you don't want to do that, fine. So, what is next? So, there are a few places that have board readiness program. I just learned about one this morning, Deloitte. There's another one in the financial services area, a search firm called Elling, Janice Ellick, she's got one. You search, and if you're interested, they do cost, so be prepared for that. But they're usually really good programs, and you also meet a lot of people then who could be your ticket to a board. So start with your CEO or other people that you know. Make it known that you'd like to be on a board. Make sure that you've got a resume that would be intriguing to people because they're going to look at your LinkedIn, et cetera, and basically your accomplishments as well as your superpower. So boards, what's wonderful here is people in finance always are, they're board material right off the bat. You need to check that box. You need somebody who's going to chair your audit committee. So unlike other people in general business, there is a spot. So, but they're also looking for specialized things. So turnarounds, acquisitions, anything that you can highlight that would be appealing if you were running a company and were looking for a board position. If you're in a company that actually has a board of directors and you have access to them, make sure they're known. Make sure your wants are known to them. And of course, it's not overt. I want to be in a corporate board because I need an extra $25,000 a year to send Rachel's kid to college. It's a little bit more subtle than that. It is, I want to learn, I also want to give. This is a good way to do it. And most companies, if they don't require it, will actually be happy that you're seeking a board position. So go to those board members. There are groups like National Association of Corporate Directors that you can network with. Network with everybody that you know, which is really easy for me as an extrovert. It's really hard for those people who are introverts. And I'm just telling you, it is worth it to put yourself out there to meet as many people as you can, because that's really the key. And make sure that you are known. It's a really hard decision to invite somebody on the board, both private and even public. It's a multi-year deal. There has to be a good fit, so having that business experience that you do, then having a special experience is really important. But more than that, it's good judgment, it's good character, and it is just being in the right place at the right time. Those of you who are in advisory services, the accounting firms probably have it easier because you're going to be accessing clients, and you can tell those clients that you'd love to be on a board someday. Those of you who are internal or sole practitioners, you might have it a little more difficult, but it does work. It helps if you're a woman, I will say that, or any kind of minority. However, don't get discouraged if you're a white male, because a lot of boards are not looking at this as a zero-sum game, a change out one for the other. They're actually looking, if they need the skill set, they're looking at expanding. So don't give up. Also, really think about it though. It takes a heck of a lot of time. It's more time than Joan Gable is telling people it's going to take, and I think most of you know that. It really is time consuming. If you're getting paid, you earn your keep. And then secondly, make sure you are on board that you check all the liabilities. I mean, there's companies know how to deal with that, but lots of times they'll let their D&O insurance lapse a bit. It's not current, so don't take anybody's word for it. When you join the board, ask that question. And I'm over and out. Thanks so much for your questions.
Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate all the information you shared. And before I let you go, I should mention, as Lynn was talking about boards, FEI has a board of directors. And there are opportunities with our board. So please, if you are interested, contact me, contact Jay, contact George, contact Brian. Really talk to anybody on our board because there are opportunities as we speak. So please check into that. And thank you so much for coming out this morning. Morning's kind of great, isn't it? I mean, now you're all fired up for the rest of the day. And we really greatly appreciate it. And I apologize, Paige, for mispronouncing. It's verse C. And we're thrilled that they're here. And we're so thankful that they're one of our strategic partners. So thank you, everyone. Go forth. Have a great day.